Example, Fourier. Very embarrassing to Marx. The classical economists really responded and destroyed them by pointing out, who's going to take out the garbage under socialism? You need prices to give people an incentive, prices and profits, to do the dirty, grubby jobs. Who's going to get up early in the morning, take out the garbage? Who's going to go deep into coal mines where it's dangerous and do this unhealthy and difficult work? Well, under capitalism, there's what we call wage differentials. People who do these things, all other things equal, get paid more than people who do a similar job that isn't dirty or a hazard to your health. The socialists said, no, there'll be a new socialist man and woman who will work not for profit, not for grubby money profit or for money income, but for the welfare of the community. Unasked and unargued in all this was that socialism could be as productive as capitalism if you could solve this so-called incentive problem. That is, that collective production would only fail because people don't have the incentive to produce. Okay? They don't have the incentive to do certain jobs. However, neither the classical economists nor the utopian socialists brought up the idea that how would you know exactly what to produce under socialism? Okay? They both more or less believe that, well, under socialism, if you could solve the incentive problem, that's where it really stood, then you would have socialism being as productive as capitalism. Okay? And this is where Mises's thesis about why socialism is impossible comes onto the scene. Okay, so really, as J.B. Say, the great French economist, pointed out, well, I call the Frenchman great, but as he pointed out in 1802, human beings can't create anything because it used to be said that they create goods, that people create goods and services to satisfy their wants. They can't create anything. They can only transform elements of their environment, natural resources and labor, into things or consumer goods that are more useful in satisfying human wants. So Marx wanted to shut these people up. He didn't want anybody to read them. So he used a brilliant polemical ploy, and I transposed the words inadvertently there. One of the greatest rhetorical ploys in history. And basically what he said was that there's something called scientific socialism. Under scientific socialism, you don't talk about socialism. It's like the rule of Fight Club. First rule of socialism is you don't talk about socialism. You only criticize capitalism. So you get rid of all this nonsense that the utopian socialists were spouting, right? He said, well, look, the reason why you don't talk about socialism is because the inexorable laws of history, as he called them, just as we have inexorable laws of nature, just as an apple falls from a tree toward the ground, all other things equal, the same thing happens in history. Just as Greek and Roman slave societies were replaced by feudalism, which in turn were replaced by commercial capitalism of the late Middle Ages, which was then replaced by industrial capitalism. Well, in the same way, capitalism will give way to socialism. So there's no reason to argue about it. Okay? Anyone who argues about it doesn't understand the laws of history, is stupid and unscientific. So you should just all shut up about it. And that worked. The utopian socialists just sort of faded away. So you don't speculate about the future. And in fact, look at what Marx's writings were all a critique of capitalism. His great work was called Das Kapital. Okay, capital. Right? He never talked about socialism. Right? Almost never. He made vague allusions to a law of history that would cause socialism to be replaced by communism, and he talked about everyone being able to do all different kinds of jobs, and he did say that the average human intelligence would rise above that of an Aristotle or a Da Vinci and so on. He said things like that, but they were sort of off-the-cuff remarks. And if you'll note that's sort of harking back to the utopian socialists. But he gave no systematic statement of what socialism would be, how it would operate. okay, what sort of economic system it would be. Okay. Okay, so what was Mises' argument against this? This is when Mises responded. Mises said that the rational allocation of resources is impossible without economic calculation using real market prices. Okay. So this was called the impossibility thesis. Mises was saying that a socialist economy, strictly speaking, was impossible. Right? And we'll come back to that and to the criticisms of him for making that strong statement. And his argument was very simple. He said, look, socialism abolishes private property in the means of production. You can own consumer goods, non-durable consumer goods, the clothes on your back, the food, and so on, but you can't even own homes and so on, let alone factories and mines and farms and so on. So the essence of socialism was the collective ownership of the means of production. So he pointed out, since the socialist state is the sole owner of all the means of production, okay, the material factors of production, we're assuming that labor is not slave labor, though it turns into that. But Mises gave them the benefit of the doubt on that. Since they own all these things, they can't be exchanged. If one group of people owns everything, then there's no market. Without exchange, then there can be no market prices. Without market prices, how can the state calculate the costs of production? How can it know in producing one thing whether it's using resources that are more valuable used elsewhere? It can't know that, okay, because it doesn't have any prices for the factors of production because they are not exchanged, because there's a sole owner of all of the factors of production. So Mises concluded, in the absence of economic calculation of profit and loss, socialist planners cannot know the most valuable uses of scarce resources, and therefore a socialist economy is strictly impossible. Economy in the sense of Menger's economizing, using resources for their most highly valued ends. That's not to say that central planners cannot set themselves up and produce something, okay? But the production will be chaotic and will not even serve the purposes of the planners. That was Mises' argument. So he focused not on the fact that the planners might not have enough knowledge, because they could always hire or impress into service scientists, engineers, and various other technical people. Okay? What Mises pointed out was that the problem of socialism was the problem of one will acting. That is, one person determining how resources were going to be allocated. And if one person owned all those resources, there could not be prices. So the essential mark of socialism is that one will alone acts. It's immaterial whose will it is. It could be somebody who's very benevolent, very smart. It doesn't matter. The main thing is that the employment of all factors of production is directed by one agency only. And then he says, one alone chooses, directs, and so on. And that is the problem, that there's no, what he later called, intellectual division of labor. Everyone in society participates in creating, and this is created, the price system. Okay? Ideas, concepts, certain social expressions of interactions among people can be created. There are new things under the sun. The price system is something that does not exist before people interact. And it cannot be created by one person. It's a social creation. I'll come back to that. So what are the preconditions of economic calculation? Well, first of all, Mises says there has to be private property in all stages of production, including land, mines, factories, and so on. They have to be privately owned so that they can be exchanged. And they also have to be permitted to be exchanged. Okay? So there has to be private property, there has to be free exchange, and there has to be sound money. Money whose value doesn't fluctuate wildly, as, for example, during a hyperinflation. Basically, money whose value is not influenced or determined by the political authorities. So those are the three preconditions. And guess what? Socialism abolishes all of those conditions. Okay? There is no private property in the means of production. There is no freedom to exchange. And finally, money is not used. Workers are paid rubles, but the rubles that they're paid are really vouchers to buy consumer goods. Okay, there are no commodities markets, stock markets, people trading businesses and so on. Money is not used for that purpose. So it's not really money. It's just vouchers to go to the company store, in this case a socialist company store, and buy the things that they may produce. So since socialism abolishes all of these three preconditions, it nullifies economic calculation, and therefore it destroys the social division of labor. The interaction of people and specialization of people that is directed by monetary calculation. Okay, so let's show what the problem of socialism is and what it is not. Let's say you have the problem of wanting to produce a car. Okay? Well, the socialist planner certainly will know the production function. That is, the various resources that are combined and transformed into the final good, and in what proportions they should be combined. You can easily get that from engineers and scientists and so on. So if a car takes P tons of steel, Q hours of machine time, R hours of unskilled labor, hours of engineering labor, square feet of factory space, kilowatts of energy, gallons of paint, and so on, you cannot add those up under socialism to get a cost. It's like adding apples and oranges. Okay? You use up certain different resources, but there is no unitary cost. You cannot determine how much it costs to produce this wonderful car, Chevy SS, which I'm very favorable to. I own its forerunner, which is the old Pontiac G8. But let's say that's the car that the socialist planner wants to produce. Should he produce that automobile? Or would all those resources be better used to produce 20 motorcycles, which he also knows how to produce? He doesn't know the answer to that. He doesn't know which good is more valuable, which is a more valuable use of those resources. So how can we calculate the cost of producing the car under socialism? Okay? In the market economy, everything that's needed to produce any good has a price at every moment. So no matter what you want to produce, you can look at the price structure, the prices of goods that you're interested in, okay? And they're not exactly present prices, they're the prices that have just been paid. You can look at those prices and you can extrapolate what they would cost you to produce this particular good by combining those resources. So you'll always know your cost of production. Now, we're not saying that entrepreneurs, because they can calculate, do not make mistakes, okay? Certainly mistakes can be made, okay? So a firm can forecast that the price of this automobile will be $44,000 once it's produced, and on the showroom floor at the dealer 3 years down the road. So the entrepreneur is always forward-looking. The future is uncertain, so he may very well be wrong. It may turn out that that car was a waste of resources, that he used resources that could have produced things worth $40,000, because he has to pay $40,000 for the inputs into the car, because other entrepreneurs are bidding for those resources also and wanting to use them for other goods and services, building houses, constructing factories, whatever it may be. So he knows his costs, but that doesn't mean he cannot make forecasting errors. So entrepreneurs can make forecasting errors.